So we are talking about the movie Knights of the Damned, directed by Simon Wells. Now, this movie is clearly influenced by a TV show that starts with games and ends in thrones. However, I've got to say, it probably acts a little bit more like the Mythica kind of sword and sorcery series of films that we've kind of seen from the States. This feels like more of a kind of a European version of that, so to speak. So Knights of the Damned, what's it about? It essentially follows a small group of knights as they are on a quest to essentially get rid of this dragon that has been bothering this particular kingdom for a kind of an amount of time. So they've been chasing it around the country. On the way back to the kingdom, they've lost most of their number. There's only 3 of them left. And on the way back, they discover there's now a new threat to the kingdom, that of the undead. Yes, you've got dragons, yes, you've got zombies, and yes, you have political intrigue and kind of backstabbing and even a little bit of suggested incest. All very much your Game of Thrones. So if you can't wait for season 8 of Game of Thrones, this may well tide you over. So I've got to say, this is a low-budget film, so obviously adjust those expectations. This probably costs a fifth of an episode of Game of Thrones, so obviously don't be expecting that kind of a, effects-driven type film. But nonetheless, I think they do a decent enough job with a good story here. With some reasonable effects. The dragon effects are a bit of a mixed bag. I do think there's some good shots of it, but sometimes when you see it flying around, it kind of looks a little bit like a video game. And the kind of the makeup effects and the zombies, again, are a little bit of a mixed bag. What does work, I think, is the action sequences. There's some pretty decent fight scenes here, and it's kind of fun seeing kind of sword and shield versus zombies. They maybe overdo it a little bit with the slow-mo in certain instances. I think maybe it's, there's too many sequences in slow motion, and it becomes a little bit noticeable. But I've got to say, the choreography and the acting in regard to the action sequences are all pretty good and actually looks quite a lot of fun. There's a little bit of CGI blood, but I actually think it kind of works in this instance. A lot of the time it annoys me, but they don't overdo it, and I think that kind of works. Here's the biggest criticism of this film, and I hate to kind of come down on a lower budget film, but some of the acting in this film is honestly some of the worst I've ever seen. It is so bad. Not from every character, but there's a lot, unfortunately. And one character who in particular, who I won't single out, but they feel like they've actually been they've been filming reshoots, I've got to say. It is cringeworthily bad. Cringeworthily bad acting. I mean, you just think, man, this is some seriously embarrassing acting here. So that really just doesn't help. But there are some kind of dodgy acting from everyone. And I also think the dialogue isn't particularly good. It almost feels like, if you've watched in Game of Thrones, people acting in a natural and realistic manner, and they talk like they're real people. With this movie, if everyone talks like they're very macho and kind of saying very kind of like macho things all the time that sound like very kind of like, 1980s choose your own adventure fantasy type kind of dialogue, if that makes sense. It didn't really work, I don't think. It didn't feel natural to me. There's a couple of instances where they kind of cut loose a little bit. There's a bizarre scene in this movie where we have this guy's drinking in a tavern, and there's kind of this contemporary music playing. Feels really out of place, I've got to say. Overall, though, I think the story actually flows quite well. It's quite a well-paced film, and you kind of grow you get to kind of like the characters a little bit, even though they are kind of fairly poorly acted and the dialogue is horrible. But it's a rollicking adventure. It's quite a swashbuckling film. It almost reminds me of the old Robin Hood films in a certain degree. It does attempt to have a little bit of an arc, sort of maybe just kind of set up other movies, very much like the Mythica series actually, and it definitely wants to have a sequel and sets up some stuff. But I always think you should maybe release one film before you try to think about doing a series of films. But who knows? But I kind of like some of the supporting characters here as well. We have these kind of group of female kind of warriors who I thought were quite fun and were quite interesting characters. Although one of them just seemed to disappear and is not mentioned again. I'm thinking maybe that the editing was just a little bit hit and miss on that one. Overall, if you are a fan of the kind of the like the Arrowstorm films, the kind of the Dawn of the Dragon Slayer type movies that we've seen, with the kind of the cheaper budget films, this is very much a comparable film to that. I don't think it breaks the mould in regards to kind of fantasy films, and they're definitely so influenced by Game of Thrones. You know, it's kind of clearly wanting to be that, but I don't feel it has the sophistication by the kind of the filmmakers to really kind of be compared to that. Like I said, its nearest cousin is the Mythica series, so if you like those movies, you'll definitely kind of like this one. Overall, though, I feel it does have some fantastic action sequences. It really does, and it's worth watching. And it's an okay story with some okay effects. So I'll give this movie a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.